Welcome to the Ishbel Well Deep Dive Workshop Series, where we dig into complex gut and hormonal conditions through the lens of curated nutrition protocols that draw on the latest science. I'll share client stories on how gut, hormone, blood chemistry, and genetics testing can revolutionize your understanding of a quote-unquote healthy diet. You can heal your body's unique symptoms and in turn up-level your life. The first step on that journey is education. So let's dig in to today's topic. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be talking today about stress and specifically how it impacts testosterone levels in men. So June is Men's Health Month, and all this month I've been talking about men's hormones, which I will say is just an area of health and men's health that as a society we don't talk about really at all. And it's a shame because especially as men get into their 40s, they end up having some issues. Men start to have some hormonal issues, but as a society, we just don't really talk about that. And we talk a lot about women's hormones as we should. We talk about perimenopause, we talk about menopause. Women oftentimes go through a whole lot as they make that transition from having a menstrual cycle to not. But what we don't, I think, give a lot of airtime to is men, and that they as well are going through pretty significant hormonal transitions as well as they get older. So if you missed the prior workshops that I did this month, feel free to reach out to me and my team, and we'd be happy to send you those full recordings. It's info@ishbelwell.com. The first workshop that I did at the beginning of June was a pretty extensive overview of men's hormones and specifically talking about erectile dysfunction. In that workshop, I do a deep dive training on and look into some work that I did with a client of mine who is in his late 40s suffering with erectile dysfunction, but also interested in getting pregnant with his wife. So we had tremendous success in helping to turn that around. So today, what I'd like to talk about is specifically how stress hormones impact testosterone. And next week, I'm going to pull all of the content together that we covered this month and put it into a workshop where we're speaking especially about tools. So, what are the most ideal diets for helping to improve testosterone? But I will say that is really just scratching the surface. Okay. Certainly things like intermittent fasting can be helpful for men who want to lose belly fat, but also increase their testosterone levels. But there is an entire world of tools at your disposal to really pinpoint exactly what's going on with your hormonal landscape and thereby then vastly improve it. So one of my intentions with doing these workshops is to really start to educate people about what the options are out there, because there are a lot of them. So let's dig into stress and the adrenals. So I find that stress, that word, is in so many ways like overused, right? I mean, everybody's always talking about stress. Everybody probably knows to some extent that stress is not good for your health. But at the same time, how does one not get stressed? Okay. And what I'm going to be talking about today is you are physiologically designed to get stressed. Okay. That's part of your survival mechanism. But B, what we're going to be talking about is that in our present day society, none of us are really designed to be on and sustaining this level of stress over the period of time that majority of people are. And I also want to quantify exactly what I mean by stress. So there's emotional stress. There are the stress of deadlines, right? The stress at work. There's relationship stress. But also under this umbrella term of stress, there's other aspects of health. There's gut health and the impact that that has on the immune system, which interestingly enough also impacts our stress hormones. There is stress that comes from imbalances in the body and the impact that that then has on stress hormones. And then we're going to be looking at kind of the reverse of that, which is how stress hormones can interfere with the production of sex hormones. So for today's workshop, speaking especially about testosterone, how stress hormones impact testosterone levels in men and how we quantifiably measure that and keep track of that and help to improve that. But also looking at some of the other stressors that you might not consider as being important. For instance, the stress that the immune system is under and how that affects stress hormones. And that also can affect the production of sex hormones like testosterone. Okay. And then lastly, I will be talking a little bit about the importance of stress relief practices, but generally next week's workshop is going to be all about that. So next week, I'm going to dig into all of the tools that I bring to the table for my male clients who are struggling with this array of symptoms that comes along with low testosterone levels. So frequently, these men are struggling with weight around their middle that they can't seem to lose, even with extensive diet and exercise. These men are oftentimes feeling really lethargic, unmotivated. They might be struggling with anxiety and depression. Here again, because we don't talk about men's hormones in our society, we frequently don't correlate these symptoms with hormones. And we really need to start looking at some of these symptoms for men through that hormone lens. Erectile dysfunction, that's such an important part of men's hormones. And so many men struggle with some form of erectile dysfunction, about 50% of the population. And sometimes young men are struggling with erectile dysfunction. And while some of the medications can be effective for that, they oftentimes leave men not feeling very well after they've taken those medications. So in the first workshop that I did in this series at the beginning of June, I really tried to draw correlations between erectile dysfunction and inflammation and kind of what erectile dysfunction as a general symptom is telling us about the body and what some of the struggles are that men are facing that they may not even understand at that point, but that's a surefire symptom, if you will, to kind of get their attention. All right, so let's do a little bit of an overview here of stress hormones and where they come from. So stress hormones are produced in a gland called the adrenal glands. It's a little tiny gland and it connects with your brain and your pituitary. And the adrenal glands output a number of different hormones. The group of hormones that are the most popular for excreting are stress hormones. And so the way that we are designed as humans is to either fight the stress that is coming our way or run away from it. Either one of those mechanisms is fueled by stress hormones first and foremost. And so as that alarm goes off in your brain telling you that there's something scary happening and you need to either fight or flee, your adrenals are then queued up to release stress hormones to help speed your body up, basically. Okay. So the adrenals also produce other hormones. There are mineral corticosteroids, which are in place to help balance minerals in the body. And the adrenals work in coordination with the kidneys to help maintain kind of fluid balance. So I actually just spoke with somebody recently who noticed that every time that he ate salt, he could gain upwards of 7 pounds in a very short period of time. And so that would certainly be a situation in which we would be wanting to look at what's going on with the adrenal glands. Are they able to balance this relationship between minerals and sodium? And frequently for men who are suffering from symptoms like gout, their adrenal glands are not functioning properly, especially in coordination with the kidneys. The adrenals produce hormones called glucocorticoids, and cortisol is the most well-known glucocorticoid. So, and cortisol in general, I find people are the most familiar with. So essentially what cortisol does is helps your cells to release energy so that, again, when you are faced with that fight or flight situation, that you can run as quickly as possible away from it, or fight to survive, right? However, again, in our modern day society, and I see this a lot of times on these adrenal panels that I run for my clients, that people's cortisol levels are really imbalanced. Cortisol is running high throughout the day, or for people who have been under chronic stress for a really long time, their cortisol levels are actually depleted and they just don't have the energy anymore to sustain that constant fight or flight state. And then finally, the adrenal hormones are a player in the production of sex hormones, and testosterone would be considered a sex hormone. When we're looking specifically at adrenal testing, the testing that I do looks at DHEA and looks at cortisol. And it's important to understand here that when I'm doing this adrenal testing, I'm not looking necessarily for disease. I'm looking more for optimization. And if, for example, I have a client who does have low testosterone levels, I want to be looking upstream. Okay, and here's what I mean by upstream. Testosterone, for example, is produced from hormones that go ahead of it. And DHEA is a key player in the production of testosterone. And DHEA is produced by the adrenal glands. So if testosterone levels are low, we also need to look upstream. We need to look at the precursor to testosterone, which would be DHEA, to make sure that the adrenal glands are receiving the support that they need, that there's optimal DHEA in place, so that then when we go downstream, there are enough tools, if you will, in place to produce optimal levels of testosterone. So how does a person end up in a situation where they're not producing enough DHEA, right? So those upstream hormones are low, which then can create a downstream effect of testosterone being low. This, by the way, is one of many considerations when I'm working with somebody who's got testosterone imbalances. And this is just one of many considerations, especially for my male clients who have low testosterone. Okay. So when we identify that either cortisol is low or DHEA is low, again, two of the measurable adrenal hormones, if either one of those hormones are low or if they're high, we need to start asking the question of why. Okay, it's never enough for me to just say, oh, okay, let's supplement you with DHEA. That's an easy fix, which it actually is. DHEA levels respond very quickly to supplementation, which is fantastic. But it's important to dig deeper, okay, and really ask that question of why. So let's look at all of the things, all of the tasks that, if you will, that the adrenals are involved in, because it is quite extensive. And once you hear this list of the things that the adrenals are involved with, I think it'll give you a better sense of how, for some people, especially as they age, the adrenal glands have a harder time keeping up. They have a harder time producing DHEA. They have a harder time regulating cortisol. Okay. So gut dysbiosis. If you're at all familiar with my practice, you know that I always start with gut health. Gut health is foundational to hormone balance and is also foundational to the immune system. And gut function works hand in hand with the immune system. 70 to 80% of the immune system is housed in the digestive system. So, as we already discussed in this workshop, you now know that the adrenal glands output hormones anytime that they perceive an unsafe environment. That unsafe environment could be a fight that you just had with your partner, or that unsafe environment could be a pathogenic bacteria that is growing in your digestive system that your immune system is constantly going to battle with. Okay? So, what's important to note here is that the adrenals don't necessarily differentiate between different kinds of stress. It's just all stress and it all requires stress hormones. Chronic pain. This is one that people don't often think about, and it's such an important part of this conversation. If you're in chronic pain, for those of you who have suffered with chronic pain, I have suffered with chronic back pain. It is so stressful and it's can at times be debilitating. It can be difficult to get through your day. And so there's that constant messaging to your brain. We have an emergency situation here. Something is not right. Okay. And that again is stressful and it will ramp up those stress hormones. Food sensitivities. This goes hand in hand with what I talked about with the gut and the immune system. Different types of infections. If you have a virus, okay, if you have a cold, we're going to see those stress hormones start to elevate. PTSD, huge part of this conversation. Again, that emotional, spiritual stress is the wheelhouse of the adrenal glands as well. Chronic stress. One example of chronic stress that people rarely, if ever, think about is negative self-talk. Okay? How frequently are you saying mean things to yourself? Sometimes it's completely unconscious, right? You don't even realize how frequently you're telling yourself that you're not good enough, how frequently you're telling yourself that you're fat, how frequently you're telling yourself that you suck at this and that. Okay. That is an inherently stressful environment for you to be existing in, and it's happening in your own brain. Blood sugar crashes. I did a whole series of workshops on blood sugar crashes and blood sugar balance about 2 months ago. So again, if you want recordings of any of those workshops, be sure to reach out to me and my team. Anytime that I work with a man or a woman in balancing their hormones, blood sugar and gut health are key, are foundational to that process. And most people who are eating a standard American diet are experiencing many blood sugar crashes throughout the day, highs and lows, and they don't even realize that they are. Gratefully, we can now track that and test that with continuous glucose monitors. Other things that the adrenal glands are doing, again, the classic example of actually physically running away from a stressor. I would actually say that this is probably the healthiest means for which the adrenals are able to function. The adrenal glands, again, produce stress hormones so that we can physically run away. That's actually how we complete the stress cycle. And frequently, we don't ever get to run away from the stress that we're experiencing, right? If you're at work and you have a customer who's really angry with you and you have to deal with it, you don't run away, right? Even though you would love to. That's what the body was designed to do, is to run away, because it then actually helps to rebalance those those stress hormones after you've run away. Okay. Most people don't have that physical outlet for stress. So they end up just marinating in those stress hormones. And that again can interfere with the production of other hormones like testosterone. Um, this list is long, so I'm going to start to speed up. Sleep disturbance is so common, especially insomnia. Fat storage. Cortisol is infamous for fat storage, and that goes hand in hand with metabolism. Sexual desire. This is where we start to see that those adrenal glands, as they become dysregulated, they can impact sex hormones like testosterone. But also, if you're just exhausted and stressed out all the time, sex may not sound that great to you. Okay. Reproduction and nourishment of babies. Here again, goes hand in hand with that last topic. The body understands that if you are perpetually under stress, it's going to start to down regulate that fertility. Okay. And we're seeing that quite a lot in people's fertility levels overall. They are declining across the world. Okay, so we talked about stress as a mental, spiritual experience, and then also talked about how stress can be perceived by the body in many different forms. But let's talk specifically about the nervous system. So the adrenal glands work hand in hand with the nervous system. There are two different aspects of the nervous system. There's the parasympathetic state, which is the rest and digest state. Pay attention there. Digest is really important. So we digest the best when we are in a restful state. If one of the reasons that your adrenals are so worn out is because you're struggling with gut issues, but you're stressed out all the time, you're probably not digesting your food very well. There's the sympathetic aspect of the nervous system, which is our fight or flight system. This sympathetic state is the state that most people are in, and people even get stuck in this state. And I for one can really relate to this in seasons of my life where I have just felt perpetually stressed out. It doesn't even matter what's going on, right? I could be sitting down to drink a glass of water and I'm just constantly stressed. Okay, so that stress over time becomes chronic, is very wearing on the entire body and very wearing on the adrenal glands, which again has downstream effects on the body's ability to produce sex hormones like testosterone. Specifically for men's health, when I'm looking at hormone panels for my male clients, I'm of course looking at testosterone and understanding what's going on there. But I would be remiss if I stopped there. So I also look at progesterone, okay, which we think about progesterone as being a female only hormone, but men also produce progesterone. And interestingly enough, in men, the adrenal glands produce 100% of the progesterone in men. So what that ends up translating to in practice is that progesterone is actually an adrenal marker. Okay. As a practitioner, I'm now looking for my male clients, I'm looking at their progesterone levels, I'm looking at their cortisol levels, and I'm looking at their DHEA levels. All three of those markers give me an idea of what's going on with this person's stress hormones specifically. Okay. And this frequently happens, this scenario that I'm about to describe. Frequently, what we see when there are low testosterone levels is that we also see low DHEA, low progesterone, and imbalanced cortisol levels. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes cortisol goes way too high during the day and then it drops super low. This is oftentimes when people feel just exhausted in the afternoon. And then it starts to bump up again and go too high right before bed, which then results in in men not really getting a good night's sleep, and they feel kind of like wired and tired at the same time before bed, which does not feel good, right? And snowballs into the next day of being exhausted. So this foundational effect of stress hormones on the production of testosterone is really a must do on our checklist of optimizing testosterone levels. And at the same time, so is gut health, right? So is checking out for food sensitivities, trying to offload all of those different tasks that the adrenal glands are trying to manage. Okay? If this is the cup that the adrenal glands have to navigate and that cup is overflowing, we need to start taking things out. So, is this person struggling with an opportunistic bacteria in their digestive system? Let's take that out. Okay. And there are ways to do that. There are very, very effective supplements that help to get rid of those things. Is this person chronically stressed at work? Do we need to bring in stress relief practices for them during the day to help them calm their nervous system down? Okay. Is this person struggling with a lot of blood sugar crashes? Okay, which again is going to be part of this adrenal cup. We can get a continuous glucose monitor on so that we can figure out where those imbalances are and help to streamline that. Okay. So when you think about stress hormones, just remember that there's a very big cup of tasks that live in that, live underneath that umbrella. And so when we need to optimize testosterone, we need to simultaneously optimize those stress hormones and figure out why the body, why the brain, why the spirit are so stressed. Why are they using so many of those stress hormones? I want to read you a quote from a book that's a really, really great book on this topic. It's by Dr. Aviva Ram, and the book is called Adrenal Thyroid Revolution. And she talks about this condition, if you will, which she titles either SOS or SOSE. And the premise of this is exactly what we're talking about today, that people get stuck in this chronic stress state. And as they get stuck in that state, they don't know how to calm down. They're never really relaxing. And so their adrenals are constantly working overtime. And as time goes on, it starts to develop into these really difficult and oftentimes debilitating symptoms, especially fatigue and brain fog. So here's what she says about this. This is SOS, survival overdrive syndrome, is when cortisol is chronically high. And again, we can test for this. We can see that that's happening. And then there's SOSE. Okay, so this is SOS, survival overdrive syndrome with exhaustion. And this is when cortisol is chronically low. Okay. And frequently we'll see for people who have super stressful jobs, for example, that they've been under an incredible amount of stress for a very long period of time. Those people, when we look and test at their adrenal glands, will oftentimes see that their cortisol is exceptionally low. Okay, which explains why they are exhausted, unmotivated, suffering from brain fog, probably not sleeping well, and simultaneously also most likely suffering from low levels of sex hormones. And especially, as we're talking about men today, frequently these men are not producing enough testosterone. So what are some of the drivers of adrenal imbalances? We talked about what the tasks are, what all the jobs are of the adrenal glands. But here are just some examples. If you lost a loved one, okay, whether you went through a breakup or somebody died, that can be incredibly, incredibly hard on the adrenal glands. Chronic illness, childbirth. This is an aspect of postnatal care that I wish as a society we talked so much more about. That yes, it's incredibly stressful to take care of a newborn baby. And also, moms have just gone through this incredibly physically exhausting experience of being pregnant and giving birth. And frequently, moms just don't get the support that they need during that season. Which rolls us right into caretakers of children, but also caretakers of the elderly. People who are looking after their adult parents. It's an incredibly difficult job. Financial pressure, right? That's that like constantly going on in the background thing, right? That's constantly stressing you out. It's exhausting. Allergies, okay? Consumption of sugar and white flour products. So we talked about how involved the adrenal glands are in blood sugar. And one of the best ways to help streamline your blood sugar starting today is to stop eating sugar and stop eating white products, including potatoes potentially. But if you really want very accurate understanding of your specific blood sugar imbalances, get in touch with me so we can get you a continuous glucose monitor and actually figure out what's going on with your unique blood sugar. Lack of nourishing foods. So again, we talked about how involved the adrenal glands are with the immune system and how involved the immune system is with the digestive system. If you're not eating a nourishing diet, your gut is going to inherently struggle. And then simultaneously, you're not going to be getting the vitamins and minerals that you need. As a reminder, we talked earlier about how one of the hormones that the adrenals produce are mineral corticosteroids, which help to balance minerals in the body. Caffeine, such a huge one. Negative attitudes and beliefs, fear, lack of relaxation. Okay. As much as some people would like to convince me that scrolling on Instagram is relaxing for them, I can 100% guarantee to you that it is not going to rewire your brain and reduce your stress hormones the way that meditation will. Toxins and incomplete tasks and procrastination. That is a big ticket item that I see so many of my clients struggling with. And or they're just like overwhelmed. They have so many tasks to do and they feel like they don't have enough time to do them. And this can result in so many of the symptoms that we talked about today. But some of the ones that I did not mention are things like eczema, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, thyroid issues like Hashimoto's, okay? That chronic impact on the immune system. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease. Digestive issues, chronic food sensitivities, and chronic development of food sensitivities due to the instability of the digestive system. Sugar cravings, such a huge one. Anxiety, irritability, depression. And when we're looking at that mental health aspect of this, it's such an important part of the conversation. Lack of willpower. People who feel like they cannot stick to a diet. Why is that? Okay. It really bugs me when we just write people off and say, they're just not disciplined. Sure. Some people, it doesn't matter enough to them to be disciplined about their diet. But there is a large group of people who care very deeply about improving their health, about changing their diet. But they are so exhausted and they have so many symptoms and they're so overwhelmed and confused, frankly, about what to eat that they don't know what to do. And they can't make forward movement because of that. And then today's workshop is specifically about men, but I do want to point out here that for women, some of the conditions where we see these adrenal issues and imbalances are with PCOS, endometriosis, and women who are in menopause. That is a group of people, women who are in menopause, who can really, really struggle with these adrenal issues. Okay, so last bit that I want to talk about here today is this relationship between stress and comfort eating. And I just kind of touched on this a little bit. Again, it bugs me when people say, oh, they're just not disciplined enough to follow a healthy diet or follow the plan. I generally find that when you start digging a little deeper, what you will discover there is much more complex. Okay? There can be a family history. There can be a lot of trauma, eating disorders associated with that. There can be a lot of confusion and overwhelm. And specifically for the topic of today's workshop and understanding the impact that stress has on what we eat, it is enormously impactful. So again, I'm going to pull from this Aviva Romm book because I feel like she just captures this so beautifully so that you can understand the physiology of this. Your brain practically ensures that when you are under constant stress, you will go for sugary, fatty, and salty foods by releasing a flood of feel-good nervous system chemicals such as serotonin and dopamine that calm your nervous system with every bite, as they also bring cortisol back into normal range. That's why they are called comfort foods. They are literally comforting your nervous system. And so here's what's so tricky about this is that people get stuck in this stress cycle, right? They're stressed, oftentimes for reasons that they're not even conscious of, okay? That stress then causes them to eat foods that they know aren't good for them, okay? But there's this like craving, this drive that they have to eat this comfort food. That comfort food then usually creates inflammation unless they've figured out how to eat comfort food that's actually healthy for them, which is one thing that I help my clients figure out a lot of times so that we can help break this cycle. But frequently people are eating comfort foods that are highly inflammatory. The body gets inflamed, it gets more stressed out, and the cycle begins again. Be a very difficult cycle to intercede upon. Okay. And part of what I see is so damaging about this cycle for so many people is that, understandably so, people give up. They stop trying because they feel like they cannot overcome the intense cravings that they're having. And what I would argue again is, let's take a deeper look at actually what's going on here. That maybe the answer is not so simple as, you're not disciplined, okay? Or you can't stick to a diet, right? I hear people say that all the time. I think that's sort of oversimplifying the whole situation vastly. Okay? How do we heal the adrenals? Here are just some quick takeaways for you. I mentioned one of them, which is start to cut down on your sugar. Start to cut down on those white foods, white flour, potato chips, things that come out of a bag. Those things will oftentimes mess up your blood sugar, which will then have an impact on your adrenal glands. Supplements are such an important part of this conversation. There are powerful supplements that can help to nourish your adrenal glands and help to optimize your adrenal glands again. And I always measure this. I always do before and after testing to make sure that I've chosen the right supplements to help boost those levels. Self-talk, talked about that a bit today. Just becoming conscious, like calling it out. Oh, there I go again on that tirade against myself. Okay. Noticing how we talk to ourselves is priority number one and is a huge accomplishment. Okay? Frequently, people don't even realize how poorly they are speaking to themselves. Okay, so just that awareness is huge. And then stress relief practices. Meditation is no joke. Okay, I will promise you that if you have never practiced meditation before, when you start practicing, you're going to tell yourself that it's not working, that you're not doing it right. And it's a waste of time. Okay. So expect when you first start meditating that you're probably not going to understand it. All right. But give it a little while. I would say give it at least a month. All right. And also if your brain needs a little bit more convincing, read some of the research on meditation and what they have found, the positive benefits that it has, not only on your brain, but also on these stress hormones that we've talked about today. Okay. So wrapping it up, if you are a guy who is struggling with hormonal imbalances, weight gain around your middle, erectile dysfunction, insomnia, lack of motivation, emotional highs and lows, blood sugar imbalances, yes, it's so important for us to directly address your testosterone levels and ensure that they are optimized. And what I will have argued here is that we cannot just address testosterone. We need to be looking at other hormones, because if you're not, you're going to be missing such a big part of the picture. Okay. Those low testosterone levels are happening for a reason. If we look at the big picture, not only can we improve your testosterone levels, but we can improve your life. Some symptoms that you don't even correlate with low testosterone can improve over time. Your life can get so much better. You can feel so much better. And that is what I want for you. Okay. So thank you for joining me tonight. I love doing these workshops. It's super fun. If you want to get in touch with me or with my team, please reach out. Our email is info, INFO, at ishbelwell.com. ISHBELWELL.com. All right. Have a great night, y'all. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me for the Ishbel Well live workshop series. If you have questions about this workshop or you have an idea for an upcoming workshop, please get in touch with the Ishbel Well team. You can email us at info@ishbelwell.com. That's info, INFO, at ishbelwell, ISHBELWELL.com. We would be absolutely thrilled to hear from you. And if you are not yet on the Ishbel Well newsletter, hop on in there and you will get the recording every single time one of these workshops is completed.